Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Heather Sells. Congress is giving President Obama the go-ahead to outfit a rebel army to defeat ISIS terrorists in Syria and Iraq. And the White House still insists the U.S. will not get sucked into another ground war. Dale Hurd has the story.
This vote, the yeas are 273, the nays are 156. The amendment is adopted.
President Obama's request for congressional backing to train and arm rebels battling the Islamic State was approved easily by the Republican-controlled House and was expected to pass in the Senate today. Before a packed gym at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, the president continued to insist that this is not a prelude to American ground troops.
I will not commit you and the rest of our armed forces to fighting another ground war in Iraq.
But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff seemed to open the door to more U.S. involvement in Iraq if airstrikes are not enough.
His stated policy is that we will not have U.S. ground forces in direct combat. But he has told me as well to come back to him on a case-by-case basis.
Before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Secretary of State John Kerry repeated the president's assertion that American ground forces will not go into combat against the Islamic State. He was met with skepticism.
Arab Sunni country is going to be putting boots on the ground in Syria against this now claimed army by your deputy.
At this moment, no country has been asked to put boots on the ground, or no country is talking of it.
The president's strategy is a campaign of airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Iraq in order to back Iraqi and Kurdish units on the ground. The White House claims more than 40 countries have offered assistance in a global coalition to fight Islamic militants. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
America's biggest challenge defeating ISIS terrorists may not be on the battlefields of Iraq, but right here at home. A Rochester, New York man has now been indicted following accusations he attempted to recruit people to travel to Syria to fight for ISIS. Police say Mufid Elfki even traveled to Buffalo to obtain a passport for one of the people he was trying to recruit. With cases like this, the FBI director told members of Congress he's concerned about jihadist indoctrination on the internet. James Comey said Americans can learn how to execute limited self-directed attacks without leaving their homes.
It's no longer necessary to actually meet somebody in al-Qaeda to get training and inspiration to conduct a terrorist attack here in the United States. Someone can do it in their pajamas in their basement.
Agents say Elfke purchased guns with plans to attack American military members as they returned home from overseas. He's facing a 7-count indictment.
Australia says it has thwarted a so-called demonstration killing plot by ISIS. Earlier today, Australian authorities detained 15 people who allegedly planned to publicly behead a random person in Sydney. The apparent goal was to demonstrate the reach of the militant group. Prime Minister Tony Abbott says intelligence in recent months shows that Australia is at serious risk of a terrorist attack.
President Obama's strategy for defeating ISIS includes arming the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. The problem is, no one's sure which, if any, rebels to trust with U.S. arms and training. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports now from Jerusalem.
Can the U.S. safely take a side in the Syrian civil war?
We're going to pick a side, or try to pick a side, and the same as we did when we went into Iraq, same as we've done in Afghanistan, and that hasn't worked well for us.
The danger many see with the U.S. policy to arm and train the Syrian rebels is that those weapons may eventually end up in the hands of ISIS, other jihadist groups, or even the Assad regime.
So who are the partners which the United States and the West are going to use to go in on the ground to destroy the Islamic State? If it's the Syrian rebels, as we're now seeing it may well be, we should understand many of those same Syrian rebels are themselves Sunni jihadis, are themselves Sunni Islamists. So if we're looking at a situation in which we're going to partner with one group of Sunni Islamists to destroy another just because the other is kind of a little bit worse, and they certainly are dreadful, I'm not quite sure what good can come of that.
Jonathan Spire is a Middle East analyst who has traveled inside Syria and studied the various Syrian rebel groups. He knows the question facing the U.S. and the West is, can they support the so-called moderate Syrian opposition?
This is perhaps the crucial matter. There are moderate and secular, democratic even maybe, forces among the Syrian armed opposition, but they are small and they are not particularly powerful. And this is perhaps the crucial point. They are engaged in a modus operandi in which they cooperate with the Islamists and the jihadis. They regard them as common fighters.
Spire says if you arm the so-called moderates, there's no firewall between them and the Islamists.
I think it cannot be stated enough times, and it cannot be stated, clearly enough, that you cannot subdivide the Syrian insurgency into moderates and Sunni Islamists. They are mixed up together, and you cannot take the Sunni Islamists out of the game, which means that if you want to make war against the Islamic State, making use of Syrian rebel fighters as your infantry, you will be pitting Sunni Islamists on your side against the Sunni Islamists on the other side.
In the murky world of the Syrian civil war, Senator Manchin may be right. Picking sides in the Middle East is a very risky game. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Egyptian Christians are calling on police in southern Egypt to find a kidnapped woman. Hundreds demonstrated outside a police station in the Minya province Wednesday, demanding they take action to locate the 37-year-old who disappeared 2 weeks ago. Police arrested some 33 Christians after Molotov cocktails reportedly were thrown at the police station. Coptic Christians have complained about the number of kidnappings of Christian women by Muslim men.
The House Select Committee on Benghazi held its first hearing Wednesday. Congress appointed the committee to learn more about the lax security conditions that led to the murder of 4 Americans on September 11, 2012. Members also hope to find out why top administration officials blamed the attack on a video and whether there was a cover-up. In Wednesday's hearing, Chairman Trey Gowdy suggested the diplomatic security chief Greg Starr that the government hasn't acted on security concerns that have been voiced for decades, at least since bombings of U.S. targets in Kenya and Lebanon.
Mr. Secretary, I want to read something to you. We are disturbed at the inadequacy of resources to provide security against terrorist attacks. We are disturbed at the relative low priority accorded security concerns. And we praise the ambassador for seeking security enhancements long before the attack. Do you know what that comes from, Mr. Secretary? What I just read?
I believe it's part of the Accountability Review Board report.
From 1999. That was
Bushnell and Nairobi, correct?
That was the ARB from 1999, and you can lay it almost perfectly over what happened in Benghazi.
Now, that special committee has a $3 million budget and will hold more hearings in the future.
President Obama is meeting with the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in the Oval Office today. Poroshenko is seeking stronger U.S. military assistance to help Ukraine in its fight against Russian-backed rebels. The U.S. has provided about $60 million in non-lethal aid to Ukraine's military, but President Obama has so far resisted requests for lethal assistance.
Voters in Scotland are heading to the polls today to vote on whether to secede from England. The country's united 307 years ago, and Scots are pretty much evenly divided on whether to stay or go.
Basically, we can still have the backup of the United Kingdom, which will give us the security we need in a globalized world.
It's a great dream to start in a new country with a new sheet, with a multicultural country. A country of, it's not about nationality, the vote. It's about a place being able to look after itself.
High turnout at the polls is expected today.
The third American Ebola patient to be hospitalized in the U.S. is now expected to make a full recovery. Doctors in Nebraska treating missionary Dr. Rick Sacra said Wednesday that an initial blood test shows a decreased amount of the virus in his blood. They're waiting on results from a second test before they'll release him. Sacra was working at a missionary hospital in Liberia when he contracted Ebola. At a congressional hearing on Wednesday, Dr. Kent Brantley was asked why Christian doctors risk their lives to help Ebola victims in Africa. Brantley responded that Christians believe Jesus told them to love your neighbor as yourself and that your neighbor is anyone in need.
The United States Air Force will no longer require airmen to say the words "So help me God" when taking the enlistment oath. Air Force officials say the change comes after an airman struck out the words on his reenlistment paperwork, going against a policy that prohibits omissions. The airman says he was told by his commanders that he must swear to God or leave the Air Force. Then the Department of Defense General Counselor ruled, "So help me God" can be left out in an airman's if an airman prefers. The Secretary of the Air Force said they are making the appropriate adjustments to ensure airmen's rights are protected.
Coming up, did President Obama lie about abortion funding in Obamacare? We'll take a closer look at the truth and what your taxpayer dollars are really being used for.
America's waistlines have been expanding rapidly in the last decade. According to the Centers for Disease Control, at least 1 in 2 adults has abdominal obesity, which is a waistline of 35 inches or more. And in the study's 12-year range, the average American male waistline grew by an inch to 40 inches. The average waist size for women grew 2 inches to 38 inches. People whose fat has settled mostly around their waistline run a higher risk of heart disease, diabetes, and other issues related to obesity. Sleep deprivation, stress, and certain medications are some of the reasons for the increased belly fat. For any kind of obesity, researchers recommend diet and exercise.
The top insurance company in Minnesota's Obamacare State Health Exchange is dropping out. Preferred One Health Insurance grabbed 59% of all private plan enrollees by offering low premiums during Obamacare signups last year. And now the company says its participation in the state exchange is not financially sustainable. The pullout likely means higher rates for consumers next year. Preferred One says it just costs too much to keep up with all the extra administrative work from government-run health care. The president of the Citizens Council for Health Freedom said Preferred One has now discovered that Obamacare is broken and can't possibly work. This is undoubtedly what happens when we depend on the government for health care coverage. We lose it.
A new Government Accountability Office report on Obamacare released this week confirms federal funding of abortions. House Republican leaders call it a bombshell.
They say the report exposes what amounts to accounting gimmicks and more broken promises. Our political reporters discuss the report in our Washington, D.C. bureau.
Does this appear to be a case where the president made broken promises to get the law passed, or do you think that this is more of an administrative mistake because you're talking about a law that applies to multiple states with different insurers and thousands of different plans?
Well, to be sure, John, I think this is an example of this complicated law. Remember, this is the 2,000-page law made even longer by HHS after they went through their regulatory process, kind of defining what these words meant and whatnot. However, we would not be sitting here having this conversation if President Obama had not struck a deal with members of his own party in the House, pro-life Democrats, remember, led by Michigan Congressman Bart Stupak, who said, Mr. President, we're not going to vote for this law unless you can assure us that taxpayer dollars will not be used to fund abortion and that enrollees in Obamacare can opt in or opt out of abortion coverage. Clearly, that has not happened. And so I think ultimately the fault here, the responsibility lies with President Obama, who struck a deal with members of his own party to make this palpable.
In response to that, what has the White House response been?
Well, it's the White House is being tight-lipped. They're not saying anything right now, actually. And politically, I'm not sure they have to. People who they're core supporters of Obamacare and of the majority of their policies aren't worried about whether tax dollars are being used to fund abortion. So I think they're thinking they can just be quiet at the moment and hope this will go away.
David, I want to turn to you real quick. What's next here? We've already seen legal challenges to Obamacare at the Supreme Court, of course, issued and ruled it's the law of the land, but there's been this piecemeal approach to taking Obamacare down. Do you think that this will play into that at all?
I think the Republicans have seen the polling on this and realize that it isn't necessarily a winning issue for the Republicans. Is Obamacare a winning issue? Yes. Repealing the law, different story. And so I think you'll see, for example, the House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy said after this abortion report came out, we need to repeal Obamacare, all of Obamacare. But I don't think they're going to do it piecemeal. I think if anything is going to happen piecemeal with the Republicans, it's going to be if they can repeal the whole law, start from scratch, and then piecemeal it together that way. I think that's what the Republicans want to do.
How do you think this shakes out for the president? He has just a little over 2 years left in office, lame duck president, and there's a very real chance that the Senate might be taken over by Republicans. So if you have a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate, does the president have any credibility left when it comes to bargaining with his congressional counterparts?
It will be very tough. I mean, look, if the Republicans take over the Senate, and of course the House seems to be is going to stay with the Republicans, the president will be very, very lame duck, not just lame duck, and so there'll be all sorts of problems for him politically. But you know, this really isn't so much about the president at this point. This is, first of all, winning back the Senate. The Republicans want to win back the Senate, and so you see pro-life groups after this abortion GAO report. They have come out in press releases saying how it's shameful that Senate Democrats like Kay Hagan and Mary Landrieu and Mark Pryor, all from red states, conservative red states, voted for taxpayer-funded abortion. And so this is the theme that you will see now going forward in September, October, into November, to make sure that those red state Democrat senators are voted out of office, hopefully, in their view, at least giving Republicans control of the Senate.
All right. Well, I've got about a minute left. Jennifer, I want to ask you real quick. Polls do show the public sentiment shifting when it comes to the issue of abortion, with more people supporting few or no exceptions when it comes to abortion. How does this play out politically?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, going back to what David was saying, the president's poll numbers are in the tanks. 40% of Americans approve the job he's doing. And then when you look specifically at foreign policy, when you look specifically at the job he's doing combating ISIS, majority of Americans just don't think he has what it takes to get the job done. And I think this is another example of Americans losing trust in the president, and even members of his own party, whom he, you know, we now know was not being straight with them when he said no taxpayer funding for abortion.
Up next, we'll visit the village where dreams come true for very sick children, a place where they get to eat all the ice cream they want all day long and celebrate Christmas once a week. Well, it can be one of the most painful experiences any family will ever know, caring for a child with a terminal disease.
But a special vacation spot in Florida gives sick children and their families a haven of joy through tough times. Angela Zapatic brings us that story from Celebration, Florida.
A storybook resort not far from the Magic Kingdom in Orlando helps create magical moments for those in need of hope. Give Kids the World Village welcomes families with a child suffering from a life-threatening illness. For the families and kids that come to the resort, it offers them a retreat from their daily routines of hospital visits and medical treatments to what feels like a real-life Candyland, complete with a gingerbread house located right behind me. Designed through the eyes of a child, the village makes young dreams come true.
You can just see they're just so tired of the battle, and they're tired of getting poked and prodded. And so what we want to do is to give them a whole week where the answer to everything is yes.
Imagine ice cream served from morning till night, and Christmas every week, complete with snow and presents. As you walk through this whimsical world, the vibrant colors and sounds seem to create happiness and inspire hope.
We work with 250 wish-granting organizations around the world, and so if a child wants to come to Orlando and their wish is granted by a wish-granting organization, 50% of the kids do want to come to Orlando, and they call us and they come here for the vacation.
The village was founded by Henry Landworth, a man who knows what it's like to be a child with stolen dreams. As a boy, he spent 5 years in Nazi concentration camps where his parents were killed. Though Landworth escaped, his childhood had vanished. Now 87 years old, he has dedicated his life to restoring stolen childhoods.
In many cases, I see myself in these children's faces. Because when I was 13, I was taken to Auschwitz, which was one of the worst camps you could possibly be in. I had no idea that I would be living. I felt that I needed to do something.
The village has helped more than 130,000 families from 72 different countries. Volunteers work year-round. They come from churches, corporations, and special events like Hearts of Reality.
Us here for a day has been great. You've seen those little kids smile, and being a pirate for them, it's been fun. It's been very fun.
I've had ovarian cancer twice, but thinking about
having a disease or having an illness that is so restricting, and you're a kid, and your sister or brother's going through it, or you're seeing your child go through it, it's so different. Having something like Give Kids the World is allowing them not to think of their illness for a second. And they're allowed to think of being a kid and being a brother and being a mother and being a father in a family.
Many families return to help spread the same hope and love that changed their lives. The Lohman family visited in 2009 with their 3-year-old son, Noah.
Noah was diagnosed before he was born with a genetic disorder, and we were given the option to terminate at that point, which we didn't and didn't feel comfortable doing, thank goodness.
After Noah passed away, they moved from their home in Canada to work at the village.
From having Noah and just being blessed by him and the joy that he brought to our lives, although we miss him dearly and we were obviously sad to not have him in our family any longer, the joy of having him and the joy of encouraging other families going through those tough times is something we wanted to share. And so what better way than to come to the place where we felt that from other volunteers and other families.
Give Kids the World Village is still expanding, fulfilling its mission to bring love, laughter, and healing to children and their families.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Angela Zatopek, CBN News, Celebration, Florida.
Makes you want to go and volunteer.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful, and I just can't get over the ice cream anytime you want it. Pretty nice.
All right, Ephraim, you go volunteer.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
And finally, today, CBN is using Superbook to introduce children to the Bible in Bulgaria.
1 in 7 of the country's population is under the age of 14, and in October, they will be able to watch Bible lessons in their own language on national television. To launch Superbook, ministry teams have begun a 2-year project to make the animated series to take the animated series to Bulgarian towns and villages. The free Superbook parties in town squares attract both children and their parents as well.
And it's great, because when you attract kids, you do attract the parents.
That's right, the whole family. Make it a family affair.
Yeah, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
We want to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. It's Thursday. Make it a thankful one.